Hello and welcome. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Emily Turner. I am a London, UK based prolific public transport rider and transport enthusiast. I wanted to make this podcast because I also really love stories and storytelling. And I wanted to combine my enthusiasm for public transport with stories and tell stories of experiences, good and bad, but sort of highlighting what an adventure travel by public transport could be. It's going to be me with guests from the world of public transport, but also from other backgrounds, writers, comedians, those sorts of things, just really showing different people's perspectives and experiences on public transport. The format this podcast is going to take is it will be fortnightly, and it's both visual and audio. So you can watch it on YouTube, because when I've asked questions about this, lots of people said they do prefer to watch YouTube versions of podcasts. But I personally like audio a lot better, and I don't want anyone listening to the audio experience to miss out. So there's going to be very, very few differences between the video and audio experience. Essentially, if you're listening on audio, you're going to miss out on obviously me and my guests and our beautiful faces, as well as my collection of transport clothing. Currently today wearing my hoodie for the Tram de Soleil. I'm not sure the pronunciation, but it's the historic tram in Majorca, which is connected to a historic railway in Majorca. If you haven't done that, Majorca is not just for partying, it's for great historic transport as well. Highly recommend it if you get the chance. But I'm wearing that today. And the other small thing you'll miss out on is at the beginning of each episode, while I play the intro music, I'm going to play a clip that I found online somewhere for free of public transport around the world. Actually, I might use my own recordings or recordings of people I know as well. I'm going to play that clip, and you can guess where that transport is. But if, like me, you're terrible at identifying international transport, then you're not missing out on much there. But that's the only difference between the video and audio version. So without further ado, I'm going to get started. Welcome to All on This Together. So if you can guess what that is, great. I don't even know if that's a tram or a light rail or what that would be considered to be, but I do know my guest today has some strong opinions on these sorts of things. So like magic, I'm going to stop talking and suddenly my guest is going to appear. All right. And my guest is here. Do you want to introduce yourself, Gareth?
Hi, Emily. Yes, my name is Gareth Dennis. I'm a railway engineer and writer. At some point, I might need to change that to railway engineer and author, because I have a book out later in the year. I'm not going to plug it. So I'm a railway engineer and writer, and I design railways for a living. That's my thing, and it is my dream job.
Amazing. And I'm sure you'll plug all your bits and pieces, and I think you should plug your book at the end. But so I'm excited to have you here. I've been on your podcast a couple of times. One of the things I really love about RailNat, or your podcast, YouTube series live, I don't know what you actually call it.
I still haven't worked out how to introduce it yet, and I've been doing it for God knows. I've been doing it for 4 years or something now, and it's got 220 episodes, and I still is it a podcast? Is it a show? I don't know. It's a YouTube. It's a podcast with slides. Is I suppose one way to describe it, but also video and interactive, and it's rare in podcasting land, because the guests or the people listening to it, generally it's live, so they can ask questions while I'm recording it, which is a unique feature of podcasting, I suppose.
Yeah, there's such a lovely community around it. I can't say I watch it live very often, but when I watch it on catch up, I'm like, oh, there's my friend saying this, and there's that person that I know from Twitter and things like that. So it's quite nice. So you're going to talk about a certain journey you did, but also sort of context around that. So I'm just going to hand over to you, and I'll interject if I have questions or things like that.
Yeah, definitely, and it's the actual journey itself is the journey. I hope is one that people might be intrigued by and interested to go, but also the context around it is certainly what makes it really interesting for me. So I'm going to tell us the story of the time that my wife and I, Dina, Dina, my wife is Serbian, by the way, so there's a bit of context in that, in that we did this journey, but we took the train from Belgrade to Bar. It's one of the great European railway journeys. It's pretty epic on this kind of winding line that climbs from Belgrade, which is sat on the Danube, climbs over a series of hills and then mountains up into Crna Gora, into Montenegro, and then drops down to the sea very quickly. So it's an epic journey, and it has incredible scenery.
Sounds amazing.
It is really incredible, and for people who enjoy a slightly shonky ride in terms of the rolling stock, it's kind of an experience. Let's put it that way. But it can be quite. We were lucky that it was during COVID in a sense, and it was quite quiet, so we had kind of the run of the place. It can be a lot busier because even though the railways are kind of unloved in the former Yugoslavia, actually it's pretty popular. So anyway, I'll set the scene. So it's chucking it down with proper continental rain. We're up at what used to be the Royal Railway Station up near the Palace. A railway station it's called Topčider, and sadly that station is now closed and the tracks have been ripped up for strange Belgrade planning reasons. But that's a whole other podcast.
Is that the same one? There's one that does. So it's not up by the Palace. There's one kind of further down that they closed recently. Is that a different station?
That's a different station. So you're referring to Glavny, which is the original fantastic Austro-Hungarian head station at the terminal tracks, right in the heart of the city centre. All the tracks have been ripped up, again, for stupid Belgrade planning reasons. Again, another episode of my podcast, I'm sure, in the future. So that station, fantastic, abandoned. The Topčider, which had this kind of royal it's a bit of an outpost, but it kind of in the style of lots of European railways. It was a royal connection onto the railway. That's now abandoned as well. But that's where we did catch the train. Basically, everyone has to catch trains either now from New Belgrade or from Prokop, which is this strange station that's been sort of getting built since the late 60s.
Yeah,
it's now the kind of central station in Belgrade, which is where
I've
most
been to
people
that
catch
one,
train.
Which I had to walk to, but I was at the back of a construction project and thought I might need to crawl in through a construction project until some local yelled at me that I had to go around the other way.
It's very strange. Yeah, exactly. And they've now put a roof on it, but it's still a bit of a concrete. It's all very, very strange.
It looked new and shiny, but it also looked half finished. So I wasn't sure. And there were like 2 trains a day or something like that. It's
very strange. It's the railways. There's some optimism and hope for railways in the former Yugoslavia and in Serbia, but it's all very strange. So anyway, so we'd weaved our way up. You couldn't even at the time catch a tram up to Topčider because I think it's line 6 has been just dug up for ages. So we had to get. My father-in-law took us up there and dropped us off, and he was just like, "What are you doing? Why are you going for a 12-hour train journey? This just sounds like my idea of hell." I was bouncing up and down with excitement, and Dina, my wife, was like. She's wonderfully supportive and she enjoys going on adventures with me and she enjoys train travel, but she was, I dare say, acutely conscious that this was what ended up being a 13-hour train journey with very limited facilities on the route. But so a little bit of trepidation. I was a little bit trepidatious because I didn't want her to have an awful time for all of a day. But anyway, so we hopped up, the train sat there, we hop on, you can see on the other side of the tracks there's a sleeper train, which gives you this little feel that this line doesn't carry many passenger trains, but there's this flow of the day train, the night train. There's also motor rail. So, any rail nerds out there, the trains that you can park your car on and it takes it across the country, that's still there. Anyway, so we're on the train. It starts moving, it starts pulling out of Belgrade and some of the sense of anticipation. And Belgrade is sort of surrounded by hills to the south, but generally sits in a kind of a big kind of flat plain. And so you sort of start moving on this railway journey. You're kind of aware of the number of hours that kind of lie ahead of you. It's quite the thing. And so you kind of move kind of traveling further and further south. Then the railway kind of climbs. The whole time it's really climbing from Belgrade, kind of heading southwards. Now this railway was built kind of in stages from from the right back after the Second World War. So the Second World War, the former Yugoslavia as it was, Yugoslavia was basically a meat grinder for Nazis. So like the whole time you just had huge amounts of resource. Like it wasn't, we're not talking about the scale of numbers that were on the Eastern Front, but actually Yugoslavia, because of its really complex terrain, it required a huge garrison of Nazi soldiers, and it meant that kind of partisan efforts, the resistance fighters did a really good job of just locking in huge numbers of Nazis. So the rest of Europe really got a bit of a saving grace by the fact there were so many soldiers having to be sort of soaked into, and there's sort of lots of interesting stories of dare and do and sort of tales of all sorts of fascinating tales, and the railway is part of it. There are also narrow gauge railways around at the time, but after the Second World War, Yugoslavia, having been a meat grinder for Nazis, was wrecked. As a country, all of its infrastructure was really battered and wrecked. And there was an enormous effort. This new socialist state emerged from the wreckage of the Second World War. And there was this thrust to build a huge amount of new railways across the country. So we're talking from 1948. After the Second World War, they had already built, nearly 500 kilometers of new railway. So 2 or 3 years after the end of the Second World War, and everyone got involved: students, retired people, everyone working. They're just huge volunteer working parties that built the railways. So these railways were built by the people optimistic about the future of their country. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
So by the time you reach 1966, 1970, the amount of new railway being built is, it's over 1,000 kilometers of new railway. The Belgrade-Bar railway was only finished in 1976. So we're talking about this is an enormously complicated railway in terms of, a quarter of the railway is in tunnels, nearly 5% of the railway is on bridges. It's huge amounts of structures and an enormous effort to kind of to create this railway. Anyway, so all of this is buzzing around in my head as I take this journey. So it's super exciting to kind of experience this railway. And so you're weaving up, and the railway kind of climbs and climbs and climbs, and it starts getting more dramatic, and you're weaving through gorges. And even so, the start is quite flat because you're in the plains of an area called Shumadia, which is south of Belgrade, kind of forest. It literally means forested region. And you're kind of like, okay, so is this just going to be lots of flat plains and a bit boring and okay? And then you reach Užice, which is this kind of it used to be called Titovo Užice, this kind of city with lots of very tall towers nestled into this kind of very dramatic valley. And you've got sort of these brutalist, this kind of Hotel Zlatibor is this famous brutalist sort of hotel in the middle. And suddenly the terrain is just kind of almost shot up out of the ground. And suddenly it's like, whoa, okay, this is getting a bit more interesting. You start weaving, and there's this old castle on the top of a hill, and it's almost like the sentry as you start really dramatically climbing, weaving into this gorge. And the rain was still pouring down, but it started getting really misty, so the mist is kind of pouring through, and these hills start emerging out of the mist as we're weaving slowly.
So how many hours in are you now?
So by this point,
immediately outside, or
so this is like we're already maybe like 2-3 hours into the journey by this point. 13 hours is such a long time. It's quite difficult to remember exactly the timings. It's like, many of the hours have passed. No, by this point, it's still fairly early doors. We'd finished our breakfast. We'd finished our Borek Sasirum, and we were like sort of looking out and kind of being interested. But we'd kind of had a bit of rest, and I was just like glued to the window because I always, a new railway journey always just makes me feel like I'm an 8-year-old. I just get very, very excited. So Užice is the point where the railway really starts climbing, and you've kind of gone through these plains. You're climbing, and the mountain that you're kind of climbing through is called Zlatibor Mountain. And so you're climbing up, and there's tunnels, and the railway is weaving this way, weaving that way, and it just starts getting spectacular. And it's just like this little taste. And there is one. I talk about how slow the journey is. Well, so this journey ended up taking 13 hours. So we had a delay for various reasons. That it was a bit of a shame because it meant that we arrived onto the Adriatic coast in the dark, so we didn't quite get the sea views, but it's fine. So 13 hours. What's a bit sad is that when the railway opened, the journey only took 7 hours. So this, so we've lost, we've almost doubled the journey time in that time. And that's partly because the railway was built, and then, the railway straddles. Well, it was all in Yugoslavia, but now it straddles. It's kind of mostly in Serbia. It dips into Bosnia and Herzegovina, and then it comes through into Montenegro. And nobody was looking after the railway. No one was agreeing to look after the railway, and indeed, it was getting bombed and blown up during the breakup of Yugoslavia. So it's a rather unloved railway, despite both in Belgrade and in other parts. It gets used quite a bit as local commuter lines as well. There's little Russian-built commuter trains. Anyway, so you're weaving through. But it's had a huge amount of investment in the engineering, in the civil engineering, in the last sort of 3-4 years. A lot of money coming from Russia, but also from China. China see it. In fact, both countries see it as, and indeed, certainly the Serbian president and government like to play both sides, as it were. So they get investment from the EU, they get investment from China, they get investment from Russia, and part of that is investing in the railway because it's still doing what it did when it was open, which was providing a direct link to the sea, a coastal, the link, landlocked Serbia, landlocked Belgrade, required a link to the sea for ports, particularly as container transport became, kind of more a more major part of the modern economy. It needed a container link, kind of a freight link, and that is very much still what the railways used as today. There are huge numbers of freight trains passing us. In fact, we would end up kind of dumped to a side while a freight train would whiz through.
Sounds like the train across Canada. It's just
yeah, exactly.
Right after freight, you're going into a passing loop, and everything else is flying by.
And to be honest, on a railway like this, it makes sense because your little passenger train can whiz up to speed, no problem. Whereas climbing up these hills, I would not like to stop and then restart a freight train, right? So it's quite interesting kind of experiencing that. So kind of at this point, you climb over, you go over the mountain over Zlatibor, and then you kind of drop down. At this point, you kind of going into the point where you dip into Bosnia for a little bit, and you've got this view. So I've been to Bosnia a couple of times. In fact, there's another fantastic railway journey in Bosnia that maybe we'll talk about in the future sometime. Really fantastic. But the Yugoslavia, because it's so mountainous, you get these incredible and lots of river gorges, and the terrain is really varied. You get these incredible railways, some incredible railway engineering. You look across to Bosnia and it does look like it's frozen in time. I've always found this in Bosnia. Like most of Bosnia just looks like it's frozen in, well, to be honest, the 60s and 70s, if not the 30s. And certainly you kind of get that view across to the kind of the rural agricultural landscape of Bosnia. And then you nip back through a tunnel and you're back in Serbia again. And then you drop down the hill to reach the border, to cross the border between Serbia and Montenegro. At which point you're already climbing again, but this time there's something different because previously you climbed over a mountain. It felt impressive, but actually the top of Zlatibor mountain, you reach about 800 meters on the railway. You then drop down in the next bit of railway, the next hill, you're aiming for a kilometer above sea level. So this huge kind of climb, and you really start feeling you almost like get pushed back into your seat as the train starts climbing. You just feel it kind of roaring up there, kind of climbing up the hill. You can hear the train working hard. Actually, one sad thing is so that when it first opened, you had these like incredible Krauss Maffei, big bulbous looking German diesel locomotive type things that used to haul them. And all of them are currently sat rusting in the depot near the station where we caught the train in Belgrade. They're all just sat there in kind of with grass and trees growing through them. It's really sad because they would be absolutely epic if they kind of looked after them. What they do have, though, is so when it was first opened, Tito, the kind of benevolent dictator, if you like, of Yugoslavia at the time, he had this blue train, the famous blue train. And I had a tour of it a couple of weeks ago. It's in Belgrade. You can organize. It's really random. You can organize a tour with just the security guard. Say hello to the stray dogs when you arrive, and go and have this little tour. It's really cool. My daughter wanted to sit. In fact, was super keen on sitting in Tito's chair, and we were kind of like, probably not. Also wanted to go have a go on Tito's bed, but again, we were like, no, let's not. So, but anyway,
I mean, I sat in Ceausescu's big chair in Rome, in Bucharest. Why not?
This is it. Yeah, exactly.
It's reclaiming it. It's reclaiming it.
The train is immaculate, and it kind of the blue train kind of represents the pride that the railway was built with. Because the blue train, every detail has been thought about. Like the ashtrays have the Yugoslav sort of crest, the flaming crest underneath. Everything is lined, particularly in the kind of the cars where the big long table was, where all the dignitaries would meet. Everything was lined in gold, and it's all and all this fantastic zebra wood and just incredible finishings, and just a really kind of fantastic mid-century vibes. And the railway was built with that pride. So lots of bits of the railway were built earlier by the working parties. The final section that opened in 1976 was the bit from Užice to kind of over into Montenegro. So the bit covering all the mountains and tunnels that was built that took until 1976 to open. But you can tell that the railway was built with pride because every now and then you see little concrete markers that someone who's done the building has kind of marked their name, or the working party that was involved in its construction, and where those have survived and haven't been kind of demolished in the more recent renovations. It was kind of nice to spot those. And again, the railway, just to describe the scenery, you're climbing the whole time. You're weaving through river valleys, nipping in and out of kind of into a mountain, out of a mountain, over a river, deep gorge to one side. The views are spectacular. There's a point where where the train pauses in advance of reaching the Montenegrin border, and you sort of sat there in the train, and you can open both the doors on the train, with whether it's stationary or not, because rolling stock, safety, and you kind of stick your head out the window and have a look around, and you're just looking at this scenery and thinking, this is absolutely incredible. This is scenery spectacular. So the last thing you do on this railway, or not the last thing, but kind of it saves the best till last, really, because the terrain at this point has all been very much like Balkan, Danube type terrain and surrounding mountains, so grassy, broken forest. As you climb up into the Dinaridi Hills, so the peaks around in Tunagora, it changes. Suddenly it's like, oh, this is it starts being like European rainforest type situation. So there's a lot more moisture, a lot more forest. And then suddenly you've got this limestone that you break out, and suddenly everything's white stone everywhere, and just a very different terrain. All of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm in the Mediterranean. And that's all of a sudden, oh, I'm on the Adriatic coast. And this happens as you climb over the peaks. So there's a tunnel there are many tunnels you go through as you go over the top of the hill, kind of just south of Kolashin, which is where the summit is. There's this funny little station that sits at the top of nowhere that no one visits, that's got a village next to it. You go over the top, and all of a sudden, having been climbing for, like 400 kilometers more, 420 kilometers-ish, you then have up to 1,032 meters or whatever it is, you then have like a very short 60 kilometers or something to go to sea level. And so there's this very dramatic drop, and you really get the feeling, and for a variety of reasons, including a very severe crash that happened a while back in the early 2000s, going down this very steep hill, I found myself subconsciously walking past all the handbrakes in the coaches going, right, that's where that handbrake is. Okay, noted. And you very much get a sense of whee as you go down in this train. But the terrain is so you go over the hill through the tunnels, and you pick up speed. The running speed is pretty good, actually. So you feel like you're going at a decent lick. There's just a sheer cliff, and if not a very steep slope down one side of the coach. And as you're kind of going and going and going, and you reach if you like, the pièce de résistance of the whole railway, which is Malarieka, the bridge at Malarieka, which is 200 meters above the stream below, which is just an enormous distance. What's 200 meters in freedom units? Like
no idea.
600, no, times 3, yeah, like 650 feet.
I don't know. I only understand meters. So
yeah, exactly. Normal units that we can imagine. 200 meters, and until 2001, this was the highest railway bridge in the world. It's still the highest railway bridge in Europe, I think. India and China, I think, have built bridges that have overtaken it. But it's still, this is an enormous structure, and you can see it in the distance as you're approaching it from the north. And you go through a tunnel, and suddenly you're looking down. You're like, ooh, that could fit the Shard and some underneath. And then you keep whizzing, and then it's very difficult to film going back down the hill. So I was trying to do this for a rail natter, and you just keep popping through tunnels because you're kind of skirting the terrain. But it's this sense of anticipation as you're going down. The camera filter on your eyes, it changes, so everything, the yellow filter gets switched up a little bit as you're getting close to the Mediterranean. The water starts looking more turquoise. You start having this like broken brush, and also some of the kind of the little narrow pines that you get, the little kind of narrow pine trees that you get close to the Mediterranean. Suddenly you sense that you've moved into a different part of the world. And you drop down and arrive, and suddenly you arrive into Podgorica, which is the capital of Montenegro, and it's a very weird city. It's like someone's kind of got a load of monopoly houses and just chucked them on the ground, and they've all landed like that, and the railway goes through it. And then you kind of, there's this beautiful stretch where you're going along next to the kind of very close to Albania, in fact, and you've got these wonderful views out across this huge lake that sits close to the Montenegrin and Albanian border, and the sun was very low at this point, so it's just casting this beautiful light. Sadly, we arrived at the coast, it was dark, so we couldn't see down to the wonderful turquoise sea. And you arrive in Bar. Bar is a weird place. So it's this big port harbour. It's a bit of a party city. Lots of people in Serbia go to Bar to party. In fact, they go generally to the Montenegrin coast to party. So it's got weird vibes. But the sense of arrival as we got off the train, it was. And what was cool is that Dina, rightly skeptical of a 13-hour train journey, and she was super keen to do it. But I could sense that she was like, I'm going to grin and bear this. But actually, she really enjoyed it, and we both had it's a really interesting journey. All the history wrapped up. For me, it's fascinating because as I met my wife and became fascinated and doing a better job to understand the history of Yugoslavia and of Serbia and the surrounding countries. It was really cool because the railway cuts through all that, and you kind of understand that history through the context of the railway passing through it. And in a sense, it was kind of good for me as well because I was looking out the window, seeing all the new signalling equipment, new track that had been laid, and the fact there is some optimism for the future that this railway is still seen as a key strategic part of the of the transport network in the region, despite the fact that as you go, pass over Mali Rijeka, you can see a huge highway being built up the, classic EU money being spent on motorways and not on railways. This huge highway being snaking up through the hill, and you're just thinking they could have double tracked the railway and. But anyway, the whole thing's electrified. By the way, it's a kind of
you were saying those old diesel unit, and I thought, oh yeah,
yes.
It must be new diesel units, but that's impressive.
The whole thing is electrified, exactly, which is very impressive. When you have people saying, "Oh, we'll never electrify the West Highland line in Scotland," "Oh, we'll never," "Oh, do we really want to electrify this rural line and that rural line?" To which both the Swiss and the former Yugoslav engineers are going, "Just electrify it. What are you fussing about?" So anyway, I realize I've weaved my tail and kind of waffled on, but that for me, that's this story. It's a fascinating story wrapped into this fascinating and very lengthy and frankly epic railway. Epic is the word I would use to describe it.
Yeah, what I really liked about that is there's what I think is so key about public transport is there's so much wrapped up in it. As you're saying, There's the history, there's the infrastructure, there's the scenery, there's so many elements of people who made that journey and people who built those railways, which I think is so lovely. Which, there are some probably road projects and things like that, or, you can look a lot at the history of other kinds of transport, but I just think you can see all of that come together. Is it, because you said, obviously, there's a lot of people who go to Bar as kind of a party city from Serbia. Presumably, most of those people are flying now. Were there others on the train, or is it more people doing it as like, this is an epic train journey to do?
So my perception on the time that I traveled and on chatting to people is that it's... So firstly, Dina would travel with her ladies and go and party hard. She was always a party animal to the extent that I'm very much not. She would go party hard, as all Belgrade women would do. Kids, they're like 18-year-olds, and they would often drive. Sometimes they get the train, sometimes they'd fly. But actually, generally, for people aren't hugely well off on average. In the cost of living is less per capita than it is in the UK, but also incomes are quite a lot less as well. So people will often be driving, and the road is super dangerous. So actually people are encouraged to take the train if they so there is a mix of people traveling that way. But my perception of the travelers on the railway is actually generally people who are not well off. It's not an expensive journey. So actually generally it's the lower income folk in Serbia and Montenegro generally traveling within countries rather than across borders. There weren't a huge number of people traveling across the border. There was certainly a bunch of people who got on one side of the border, then got off on the next station. So again, you can see how artificial some of these borders still are, particularly between, I would say one of the softer borders is between Serbia and Montenegro. That was the last border to be erected, if you like. Serbia and Montenegro stayed euphemistically calling themselves Yugoslavia until pretty recently, relatively speaking, into the mid 2000s. So, generally less well off people using the railway, and certainly like the people who are better off will be flying for sure. Others will be driving, but there was a decent, and from what I've heard from other people taking the train, Richard Smith is someone who's, for example, taken this journey more recently, is that it's really busy. It's actually really very busy. And it's a lot of local people. It's a bit like cross country in a sense, the cross country in the UK, in that it's a long distance railway, but it gets used as little localized commuting as it goes. So it gets really big surges of busyness. Podgorica around there, it gets busy. People traveling Podgorica to Bar, people traveling in and out of Belgrade. So if a couple of as far as Užice, you get people kind of commuting or if not commuting, then making a journey to do something in the city, stay overnight and then come back. So yeah, it's an interesting mix. It's very different. Given the frequency of service, you've got this long distance service that runs during the day and during the night, but you also do have these local services that, and indeed some of them are flirts. Some of them are brand new Stadler flirts. So there are some new trains running on the service. So there is a mixture of. Some of the trains are flirts, outrageous flirts.
No, I just think if anyone's listening to this who's not a transport enthusiast, like, what are you talking about? Basically, they're fancy new trains that they have on.
They're fancy, nice, level boarded. Well, no, it's not level boarding because because the platforms are at ground level. But they're very nice trains, well maintained. They've been bought. A load of these have been financed and bought recently as part of the general renaissance in the railways in Serbia that has been happening. With upgrades happening in other directions as well. Although not on key corridors like Belgrade Belgrade, Zagreb. But again, the railways of Yugoslavia and what they ought to do is another episode for another different podcast.
Yes. No, it's great to hear that, because I think, it's one of those things that constantly gets bemoaned in other parts of, well, particularly the UK, but Europe as well, as people flying because it's cheaper than taking the train. But discovering that taking the train is cheaper is nice, even if it's a longer journey. I mean, my 2 experiences of trains in Serbia were, one of them was an incredibly slow journey from Belgrade to Niš, which it was fine, but it was very slow. And the other one was getting to the station, this was in 2009, saying I want to book a train to Venice, and them just saying no repeatedly at me until someone who spoke English came up and said, there's a train strike in Italy right now. And eventually getting a train to Croatia, and I loved Croatia, and it was wonderful. But yeah, I think it's really nice to hear exciting, positive stories, and that people locally are using it, and it's not just some kind of, this is a fancy railway journey that people fly in to do.
Very much a build it and they will come situation, as it always is with railways, in that you've got the railway currently massively being upgraded between, frustratingly, the straight line. So one of the things that Dean and I did a few times before the little one arrived was getting the train back from Belgrade to see if we could practically, because we've got family out there, so we do fly out there, and it would be nice. It was nice. The idea was, if the railways get better, we fly out, but then we get the train back, or vice versa. We make a holiday of it, or even maybe do it over long weekends if we can get the train tied in with the new sleepers that are arriving in Western Europe. So it's starting to get to the point where it can work. Frustratingly, they're doing the upgrade up to Budapest, so there's a huge amount being spent. It's still very delayed, annoyingly. The project is slipping. But in theory, over the next couple of years, we might start to see the new trains running at speed. But they've done part. Actually, funnily enough, Serbia is the bit that's most ahead. It's Hungary that's been dragging its feet for geopolitical reasons mostly. The line now up to Novi Sad, further along the Danube. Very interesting city, well worth going to visit. Actually, even more Vojvodina. Like Vojvodina is the bit that's kind of the Hungarian side of Serbia, and the goulash is fantastic. So yeah, Novi Sad's great for goulash. Anyway, and the fortress is fantastic. But the trains now up to Novi Sad are really fast, really modern. It's a really good train. It's like a good train journey, and it's really busy. So the people I've heard talking about that line now, it's really busy because the journey is good. People are traveling between those two. It's actually now you can live in Novi Sad and commute to Belgrade. Novi Sad's much cheaper. It's actually a nicer city in some ways. I love Belgrade, absolutely adore Belgrade, but it's being ruined by its current masters and all the fantastic heritage and culture being smashed up for plastic rectangles. But anyway, another story. However, it is upgraded. We're seeing we are seeing positive steps forwards in Yugoslav railway. The problem is the geopolitics between Belgrade and Croatia mean that the direct straight line towards us, which is via Zagreb, that line, even though it's pretty much a dart on the line, it could be they could upgrade it to be a high speed line with very little inputs, because it's a straight line on the map from Belgrade to Zagreb along kind of straight along the kind of the flat plains there. They are still miles away from that. Even reopening, let alone running a decent service like it used to in the 70s.
Because when my partner Paul and I went to Istanbul and back, we got to Slavonski Brod on the edge of Croatia, and then had to switch to a Flixbus driven by a driver and opposite driver who were eating a tiramisu and texting while driving. And we were like, Jesus Christ, we're going to die.
Oh my goodness.
We're sitting there just like, this is, we're going to die here. But we made it, but we had to go there to Belgrade. And then from Belgrade to Niš. And then we went to Dimitrovgrad on a coach, and then we were going to get a train, but they had put the time zones wrong because it was the Bulgarian railway, but it was in Serbia, but they put it on the Bulgarian time zone. So we missed the train by 2 minutes and then had to get another coach. So it's just like that integration between.
There's a long way to go to integrate the railways to the Balkans. And it's a shame because it's a really fascinating part of the world. Well worth exploring. Bosnia, true for Bosnia as well, which is Bosnia is just the forgotten bit of Europe. Everyone's just ignored and forgotten about it. It's an inconvenient part of the world, and so the EU, the UN, the US, the UK have all just ignored Bosnia and pretended it's not there. The railways the railways that are still operational in Bosnia are absolutely spectacular. Just like Mostar to Sarajevo, for example, is one of the most stunning railway journeys I've ever done. Absolutely compares to Belgrade-Bar. So anyway, so yeah, like the journey that you can, yes, obviously, when you get to Zagreb, if you can connect Zagreb to Belgrade with the fast journey, then you're winning, because Zagreb Ljubljana is being upgraded and it's lovely. And then Ljubljana is kind of, you're starting to get into the core of the European rail network. At that point, you're free to
because you can go
arrive
Stuttgart.
anywhere.
You can go Stuttgart to Zagreb, so that's pretty fast. I mean, we did that. Well, we did that in a day. I think we did overnight from Stuttgart to Ljubljana, and then did the little train to Zagreb in the evening. It was quite, you can do that quite quickly, but from there, the connections break down a little bit more.
And it's that, so the key thing is one of the key things for doing it really quickly is getting to Vienna, because the new sleeper services there are now. It means that you can get, Brussels in an evening with Eurostar, then overnight from Brussels to Vienna, and then the next day you then go Vienna, in theory, Vienna, Belgrade, but we're still away from that happening. But that's, hopefully by the end of the decade, that might start being a reality, because then I can start traveling by train with the little one rather than flying.
I did Vienna to Belgrade in 2009. No, yeah, I did. I think I did that exist back then? No, I did do Vienna to Belgrade, because I'd been in Vienna and then I was visiting a friend in Belgrade. But
so it did run, and it ran via Zagreb. They basically, COVID was using an excuse to can off the Belgrade-Zagreb route, and they haven't bothered to reinstate it. And all the signalings, for some reason, the Zagreb, again, weirdly, the Croatian side, not the Serbian side, the Croatian side has let all their signaling go for some bizarre reason. And so now they're like, oh, we've got to rebuild all the signaling to get the train running. It's like, it was a few years ago. What? Just dust it off. Anyway, so I don't know. The trouble with an area that made geopolitics its thing in a big way from the kind of the, well, through the 90s in a big way, means that there's a lot of bad blood between people, and it makes rebuilding railways that require us to be friends and collaborate. It requires it requires friendship and collaboration, which is a thing that is we're not quite there yet. Even though actually the former Yugoslavia could combine to be quite a good economic powerhouse. Anyway, future's not achieved, but anyway, railways are helping to stitch the area back together, which is kind of why this story is a nice one, because it is helping to break down some of those borders again.
Amazing. And I could talk about railways in Europe that I've traveled on and you've traveled on for ages, but I realize I want to sort of rein this in a little bit. My last two questions that I'm going to ask every guest, you're just the first one. What's your favorite form of public transport? I think I know the answer.
Yeah, it's the train. It's got to be the train.
I think
I'm going to say high-speed train, because even though I love local lines, high-speed train is the only form of public transport. In fact, it's the only form of transport that actually pays its way in terms of all of its externalities. So I'm going to fly the flag for high-speed rail.
And I think this might lead to my next question, which is, what is the one thing that would make transport better in this country? Now, I know you very much live in the reality of transport. You could choose something completely silly, like you get free ice cream on every train or something like that, but choose whatever you like. What would be my number one? I know you've got so many things.
Thing?
You've got so many things.
Maybe I'll be boring and say that the one thing that the UK needs is a fully fledged high-speed rail network, and not because we need the high-speed trains, although they would be fantastic. It's because we've got so many cities that have not got the ability to unleash transport in a full way, because their railways are full of long-distance trains. So it's, for me, the high-speed network is more about getting rid of the high-speed trains, making them hide, so that we can have more local trains that actually unlock things for people. So high speed 2 and the rest is probably what I would ask for, which I know is a bit of a boring answer, but it's only because I want us all to take the train.
No, I get that. Better train connections is something I'm a big fan of. As someone who's taken buses all over the place.
Well, I mean, indeed, yeah.
Sometimes, most of the time, I'm like, there's a more efficient way to do this by train. But things like in the north of Scotland, there isn't. The train is slower than taking the bus from Wick or Thurso down to Aberdeen.
My highest value
to Inverness, and then over.
My highest value train ticket ever, and I don't think it'll ever be beaten, and this includes in the rest of the world, was I paid £9 to get from Edinburgh to Thurso, and that is like a train journey that takes about as long as Belgrade-Bar. So by pound per minute, that was some serious high value there of getting me and my bicycle up to Thurso to then cycle around and come back. It's
about £60 just to get from Thurso to Inverness or something. I can't remember how much it was, but it was.
This was admittedly an advance ticket in the 2010, 2011, long enough ago that you could every now and then sneak a really good advance ticket. Nice. Which I was very pleased about.
Well, thank you for coming along and sharing that story. I really enjoyed that. where can people find you? Or, I mean, I'm sure lots of people will be finding this via you, but, you know, if they don't know you,
You
where can they
understand,
find you?
Emily. Your reach is far and wide. Yeah, it'd be an absolute joy and a pleasure for if people want to come and join a Rail Natter. My recommendation is there are lots of, because it's into, when you got 220 plus episodes or 220-ish episodes of a series. It's a bit like, what? How do I start?
Yeah.
Firstly, you don't have to. You can just come and join the latest episode, which is probably the best way to get into it. But also, if you've got a particular thing you're interested in, because it covers loads of stuff. We cover art, we cover policy, we cover weird and wacky stuff. We cover some fun things, some nonsense, some train crashes. We cover all sorts, and it's not all about trains. We cover buses. We cover all sorts of things. It's to kind of just have a surf through their various playlists covering different themes with that I try to kind of put things in. So you can come and have a look at those. So yeah, Rail Natter, but it goes out live 8 p.m. on a Wednesday, almost every week. I've started giving I broke the I'd had a solid run of like whatever 3-4 years of not a single week missed, and I decided to give myself a bit of break. So I've now the genie's out the bottle that I can now pause it every now and then, but almost every week. But no, the fact that I've been your first guest that you're recording with, Emily, is very, very cool. I don't know whether it'll go out in the same order as you've recorded, but
it will,
because
people
behind the curtain. Yeah,
it will, because I already did the intro as if it was
nice.
The first.
Excellent.
I realized at some point I should have gone, maybe I could have interchanged them, but then I was like, you know what, let's just do this one first, and then the other ones I can swap around, and yeah, we'll see. I'm trying to get about 6 done before I release things, so that's where we're at.
That's it. It's exciting. Well, it's an absolute pleasure to join all of your first time listeners. It's very cool.
Great, yeah, and it's great to have you here. So thank you so much, and I will pause now. Gareth will disappear, and I'll be back in a second. Thank you so much to Gareth for joining us. I think that was a really fascinating story that wove together both his transport journey and the history of the region and the history of transport and all sorts of connections from an area of the world that he knows quite well. If you are joining us for the first time, but I hope you want to come back again. So please like, subscribe, whatever it is on whatever form you're listening to this, whether it's a podcast or it's on YouTube. Love you to do that. If you would like more content, I have another podcast. My partner Paul and I make a podcast about the London Underground. It's called Round O Round We Go. Very sort of nerdy and specific, lots of detail. We've got 24 episodes out, and I know we haven't made one in a while. If you're a fan, I promise we are working on it. We're hoping to have some more episodes soon. So that's available. I am also available on the smoldering platform formerly known as Twitter at @ETRightHome. And I'm also trying to be on Instagram and TikTok more, and that's at EmilyRidesTheBus. I'll put those in the show notes, and I'll put that on a slide at the end. So just want to say a big thank you again to Gareth and to you for listening to this first episode. I will be back in 2 weeks' time on Monday. So Monday is the release date for these. In 2 weeks' time with a new guest telling their own story about transport from a different part of the world or a different form of transport. We'll see at the time. Thank you so much.